Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining me once again for A Voice from the Margins. It's been quite some time. We had one show week before last, but I had to suspend my show once again because last week I was in the field. As many of you might know, Green Party on the Green Party ticket. I was actually living in Colombia, and that's really home. And so I've been back and forth after the campaign. But one of the things that I do down here is I host delegations that come through, people who are wanting to understand the realities of might know that there's a lot of because we brought the delegation across the country, giving them a chance to see firsthand the issues that people are facing here in this country, and the issues they will continue to face even after a peace process is concluded. Now, bear with me, folks, because I understand that we're having a bit of a problem with the Skype connection, but we're going to plow through this. This week, we're going to be up close and personal. It will just be myself. I have a few things I want to talk about. In addition to the delegation that I was involved in last week, in the country, in the U.S. and in Colombia. I've been involved in providing support for the peace process, of course, but I'm also getting ready to launch a new formation called the Black Alliance for Peace. And we're going to launch this on April the 4th. It's part of our attempt to try to revitalize the anti-war movement in the U.S. We believe that, with the end of the Obama era, in which people are now beginning to sort of come back to their senses, if you will, and begin to think more critically, then now we have an opportunity to bring back to the center the issue, the question of peace, and the commitment that many of us believe we have to have to putting pressure on this state to curtail, modify, stop their war activities is having a devastating impact on people around the world. So the Black Alliance for Peace will be part of that process. We are concentrating on building the anti-war sentiment, or to revive it, if you will, among African Americans. As many of you might know, the African has been in the U.S. historically, but again, as a consequence of the Obama era and the relatively dramatic swing to the right among some sectors of the Black population, we saw that for the first time, the Black community was in alignment with some of the more backward elements of U.S. foreign policy, including supporting the expanded drone warfare by Obama, being prepared to support strike in Syria, and taking a very energy of full dominance. So we're going to launch this April the 4th from Jackson, Mississippi, which will be my new U.S. base. And we're going to build this movement. We're going to connect this to the work that we're doing with the United National Anti-War Coalition. Their conference is going to take place June 16th in Richmond. We hope that everybody that hears about this will attempt to join us in Richmond because we are trying to build not only the black anti-war presence, but the anti-war presence as a whole here in this country. So we are still having some degree of Skype problems. The signal doesn't seem to be cooperating with us, but we're going to keep going. Michael, am I still on? Yes, Kristen, I'm still here, still struggling. We have work to do. So I wanted to just talk about some of the issues that we need to talk about. Some of the things happening here in this country that's been in the news, and sometimes maybe to the detriment of other issues. And the first issue I want to talk about briefly is this continued fixation on the part of the corporate media with this issue of Russia. And the collusion is alleged between the Trump administration or the Trump campaign and the Russian government. Now, I don't know about some of you, but I find this whole issue to be almost insulting in the sense that it doesn't really appear to be any kind of case here, but CNN and MSNBC and some of the other news outlets seem to be committed to a strategy of attempting to delegitimize the Trump presidency, with and perpetuating the notion that at some point that there's going to be some kind of impeachment process, and we all will be rid of Donald Trump as a consequence of his alleged collusion with the Russians. Now, there are a number of things that are problematic with that. One, of course, is the notion that, or the implication that without some kind of collusion or support from the Russians, then that Hillary Clinton would have won the election. Now, we know that is a ridiculous proposition. If the Democrats were serious about advancing the strongest that clearly all the polls indicated could beat Donald Trump, then they would have thrown their support behind Bernie Sanders. But the Democrats are more committed to maintaining the power and the control of the Democratic Leadership Council wing of the party, that is the right wing of the Democratic Party, and they were prepared to support that wing, even if it meant the defeat of the Democratic Party as a whole. And that is exactly what happened. I mean, when you look at how they handled that situation with the Sanders candidacy and the need, one would assume, to unite the party after the primary, you would think that they would have offered a fig leaf, if you will, to the Sanders campaign, maybe inviting him to join the ticket, or someone from his camp, as opposed to throwing dirt in their faces and picking as the VP another neoliberal corporatist in the guise of Tim Kaine. And then to make matters worse, after they blow the election, and they blew the election because they were allowing themselves to be guided by some kind of insane notion that a computer can determine for you how and where you should be campaigning. So they basically did not campaign vigorously in places like Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. And guess what? Those were the key states that they ended up blowing. So it's quite clear that these folks had enough incompetence by themselves to blow the campaign. There was no reason why the Russians needed to collude with the Trump campaign on Trump to be the president. The other part of that is really sort of ridiculous. It's this idea that that the Trump forces are going to be impeached, and that with his pending impeachment, then there's going to be an environment for a better politics. Well, look at who his vice president is, Mike Pence, who is a more serious right-wing ideologue than Donald Trump. So, it just makes the strategy makes no sense. And what is even more detrimental about the strategy is that it's now becoming a diversion. That here we have a marvelous opportunity to with the submission of Trump's budget to begin the process of annexing Trump from his social base, because that, like I said, real pain and suffering for the very social forces that are at the base of his support. Rural workers, the lower element of the middle class, but instead of the Democrats being able to focus in on those contradictions of a request to expand the military budget by 10% or $54 billion. Instead, the attention is still being diverted to this Trump Russian collusion issue. It is blowing a strategic opportunity and setting up the Democrat Party again for failure. But that's what they do. And that's why we have to have a real alternative here in this country. That's why it's so vitally important, the Green Party. So that's what we need to talk about. We need to do that. The other issue I wanted to talk about very briefly that I'm very concerned about is our concerns around issues of war and peace. And that is the expansion of the U.S. presence in Syria. Now, we've been having sort of a gradual reinvasion of the U.S. into the Middle East, into Iraq. And now we see that we have boots on the ground in Syria. Now, that is problematic on so many different levels. One, of course, is that, like it or not, there is, in fact, an internationally recognized, theoretically sovereign state called Syria that's supposed to have sovereignty over its borders and its airspace. Into any intrusion, any entering into that territory by a foreign state, for it to be legal, has to be as a consequence of an invitation issued by the Syrian state, the Syrian government. Well, we know that. So the very presence of U.S. Troops on the ground in Syria is a violation of international law. And everybody knows that, and that issue needs to be needs to be spoken about in the U.S. And it needs to be opposed, because we see this creeping mission again. We see that there are comments from various military forces that say that not only are they going to be there to beat back ISIS, but they intend to permanently occupy Syrian territory. And the question becomes, who authorized that? Was that authorized by the Syrian government? And it was not authorized by Congress. So where is the legal basis for this? But my friends, as long as we are diverted with the Russians, as long as we have allowed ourselves to be sort of conditioned to support these military actions because of our concerns with terrorism in the Middle East, then we're going to allow the state to in our name and expanding and perpetuating human misery in Syria and in other parts of the world. So, we've got to be vigilant, my friends. We've got to find a way to put a break on this activity because if we don't do that, we're going to find ourselves in a continual spiral of war and violence. So these are two of the issues I'm really concerned about. Syria, I'm concerned about what's happening in Mosul to the civilians who are trapped in that city. I'm concerned about the fact that we have not taken up a vigorous fight to advance the notion of improved Medicare for all in the wake of the defeat of the Trump healthcare bill. Now we have an opportunity to, in fact, raise that as a serious issue. But again, that's not being raised. I'm concerned also about the internal conversations among those of us in the Green Party in terms of what should be the Green Party priorities, what should be the issues that we embrace and advance as part of our efforts to build an alternative party here in this country. So these are some of the concerns that I have. I want to now turn to you and see what some of your concerns and questions are. So let me see what we have here. As Mike is shooting me these. Let's see where we are. Please bear with me because my Skype is not working too well. So Adrian asked the question, how do I feel about the meeting next week, next Tuesday, of the OAS to kick Venezuela from the organization and to isolate the country economically? Good question. I think it is really a shame that even under the Obama administration, that the U.S. state decided that they're going to engage in a concentrated effort to destabilize the Venezuela state. We were always concerned about that for quite some time, that as the U.S. sort of went down this line of states that it was going to destabilize and to destroy, starting with the states in the Middle East, we were very concerned about them shifting their attention to the Americas and attempting to undermine the progress that was being made in the Americas in places like Venezuela, Ecuador, and Bolivia. The attempts by people in the Americas to finally begin to move in a direction in which they could free themselves from the clutches of their powerful neighbor in the north that has been responsible for so much suffering and death in the Americas. But 2 years ago, they began to focus more on the Americas, and they began to focus on Venezuela specifically as the leading state in that progressive coalition. And we saw the consequences. We saw the attempt to try to build sort of a revolution, if you will, empowering the right wing to engage in oppositional work. And then even as Obama left office, he identified this relatively insignificant state in terms of its ability to influence the world and to threaten the U.S. He identified Venezuela as a threat to U.S. national security. Completely outrageous. So this attempt by the OAS is a continuation of that effort to try to isolate and undermine Venezuela. But despite whatever internal contradictions they have, many of us still continue to support Venezuela, support the people of that country, to support the idea that they have the right to build their own process, and they have a right to maintain their sovereignty. So we hope that they're going to be successful in effect doing that. The question becomes, Josu, what separates you from Democratic Socialists of America? It seems they should join Green. Well, I think that there are some similar ideological orientations. Um, I think one of the things that may separate at least myself from the DSA is that I'm for a more rigorous attempt to build socialism in the U.S. Um, I am not prepared to engage in a process in which, if we're able to win a nominal state power, that we will only attempt to manage the economy. I think that what we have to do is to begin to move toward the transformation of the U.S. economy. So I would be for, as the first step, um, nationalizing the energy companies, in fact, to nationalize the pharmaceutical companies. It makes no sense for us to be in a position to have to try to negotiate prices around pharmaceuticals. I would be more vigorous in creating a truly universal healthcare system, including perhaps making sure that the companies that build and develop medical technology are basically committed to the public good, committed to supporting the healthcare system in such a way where we can make sure that everybody has universal health care. I'm for not only breaking up the banks, but I think the banks should be under public control. I think the Fed should be under public control. It makes no sense that private bankers should have control over the monetary system of this country. So I would be more toward more vigorous attempts to build and to bring more aspects of the heights of the economy, if you will, under the control of the public. So that might be some of the ways in which their positions and mine might be a little different. Josh wants to know, how can we best convey the extreme danger and irresponsibility of heightening tensions um, with Russia in such an environment that now exists? That's a very good and important question. I don't think people understand how dangerous the situation is. That when you have provocations like the rotating of NATO troops on the western border, um, that's very dangerous. So you have what appears to be a move toward a commitment on the part of the U.S. state that they can, in fact, engage in a first strike and take out the Russian nuclear capacity. Those are dangerous, dangerous conversations. When you have the Democrats and others who call themselves progressive uh, beating the drums of war, suggesting that alleged Russia involvement in the U.S. elections is an act of war. It is complete and utter madness. We're talking about the real possibility of an engagement between the U.S. And Russia that could result in a nuclear war. So, we seem to have a situation in the U.S. now where people are basically not being very rational. It is not just the right wing. It's also those individuals who self-define as liberals. So our responsibility is just to continue to raise the questions, to try to um, to bring about some sanity, to remind people that we have an investment in peace, and that we don't want to encourage any kind of situation in which massive numbers of people are going to lose their lives. So it is a very dangerous situation that we have to oppose, and hopefully we can create a situation where people can come back to their senses. Yes, we do need a real anti-war movement in the U.S., and that's what we're moving toward. I'm on the organizing committee of the United National Anti-War Coalition, and as I said at the top of the hour, our conference will be June 16th through the 18th in Richmond, Virginia. We believe that we have to build an anti-war movement at this point, or we are going to be facing some very serious situations. Jason asked the question: should we be concerned about Russian in terms of what was testified to in the Senate intelligence hearing today? Not necessarily collusion with the Trump campaign that you believe is a red herring, but the use of fake news, paid internet trolls, etc., to target political candidates in elections. I think that's more of a diversion than the notion of Russian hacking, because what that suggests is that the response has to be that they put in place certain kinds of measures and mechanisms to monitor thought, to monitor information, to determine who is disseminating so-called fake news from so-called real news. I think that is a very dangerous proposition. You know, whether or not they have paid trolls or not, I'm not really concerned about that. I mean, look, if we have an enlightened population, I believe that people have the ability to make to discern for themselves what are their understanding of facts, to reason for themselves. I don't need to have any type of governmental apparatus or even private apparatus in terms of Facebook determining for me what are fake versus real news sites. Because I'm going to tell you something. If you ask me, I'd watch fake news every day because I have to watch it. Every time I turn on CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, every time I read articles in the New York Times or the Washington Post, they have an angle, they have an editorial angle, they have a world view. They select what facts are going to be centered and what facts are marginal. Don't be confused by this notion of something called objective reality and objective facts. You know, you have to discern for yourself by um, uh, uh, filtering for yourself a range of information, a range of so-called facts, in order to try to come to some understanding of what you might define as the objective truth. So, this hearing, this thing about fake news and all of that, I think is a very dangerous move. It is the first step toward really policing thought, and something we've got to be very concerned with and really oppose. Ricky Chering, this is going to be our last question. Oh, this time went by so quickly. What is your stance on slavery reparations, and don't you think it needs to be discussed more out in the open? Yes, it does. Um, and you might know that the only major party in this country that has in this platform is principles is the commitment to the issue of reparations. So reparations is something we should talk about. For myself, I believe that reparations is something that will be it should be part of a conversation. But once we have a real shift in power, once we are in the position to really transform the state and the structure of the state, I don't believe that there's going to be something called reparations for African American people in this country within the existing state structure. But that is a conversation for another time. It's something we will really try to delve into because it's a very complex and important conversation. So, folks, I think that we are heading toward the end of our time. Carlos asked the question, what would you tell new Green Party members to do in order to bring more awareness to our overall existence as a political party? How would you suggest getting more recognition as a whole? Very good question. I think that Green Party members should not be shy in making sure that when they are in social justice settings, that they identify themselves as Green Party members. I think that Green Party chapters should have, as part of their developmental plan, plans to try to connect up more closely with social movements in their areas. I think that we should not be shy in advancing our platform and saying that this is the transitional platform, the Green New Deal, that we should, with power and confidence, say that we have to build a new alternative, and we have the platform to, in fact, do that. To talk about ending student debt, to talk about universal health care, to talk about how we have to have free education in this country all the way through college. We have the platform, my friends, and we have to be bold enough and confident enough to, in fact, push that platform as the real alternative here in this country. I'm being reminded that now we have gone over our time. This time goes by so quickly. I will be back next week. We have two guests over the next couple of weeks. Next week, we'll be talking with Bruce Dixon to talk about Green Party development. And week after that, we have with us Stephen Grumbine from the Real Progressives to talk about monetary theory. So friends, join us again next week, this time, this place, Thursday, 8 p.m. Eastern Time, for another conversation, another experience with a voice from the margins. Thank you so much.